Okay, you ready for chapter 23? Remember, they had just been in on the room with Longclaw and the king, and he put the golden eyes back in, and they disappeared. Chapter 23 is called The Mutt's Noggin. A moment later, Peter and Sir Toad reappeared beside Peg and Simon. They tumbled to the ground, sending scrolls everywhere. The princess was furious and not a little startled. "You could have gotten us killed!" She swatted Peter's ear with a map. "I sent Simon down to check on you, and he was nearly spotted. And what are those ridiculous papers?" "We had to find out what they were talking about," the boy said, quickly slipping the box of fantastic eyes back into his bag. He retied the bandage over his sockets before the others could notice. Simon hopped closer. "Your head bleeds, Sir Toad. Are you badly wounded?" "Only my honor," the knight said weakly. "We fled before I had a proper chance to fight back. Why, another minute and I'd have given that ape a gash to match my own." Peg returned to the subject at hand. "That was incredibly stupid of both of you. You knew you weren't ready for this task, I knew you weren't ready for this task." Peter, who had fought so hard to win the princess's trust, resented this. "Sorry if we inconvenienced you. I figured we might want to know the king's plans before we rushed into anything." He snatched the scroll from her hand and stuffed it into his bag. "Besides, one of these ridiculous papers might just show us how to break out of this place." Their argument was cut short when Longclaw stormed into the mines and howled the alarm. Apes scattered in all directions in search of a brat with golden eyes. Before Simon or Peg could ask what that meant, Peter started for the tunnels. "Let's go, Sir Toad. Guess we'll just have to risk our necks for Her Majesty some other time." As they traveled back to the hideout, the two children maintained a frigid silence. Peg felt bad about the way she had spoken to Peter, but could not come up with any good way of saying "I'm sorry" that didn't also say "I'm wrong." Peter, on the other hand, was too busy compiling a list of all the thankless sacrifices he'd made to even contemplate an apology. Sir Toad and Simon did not speak, but they exchanged occasional looks meant to convey that they at least bore no hard feelings. As with most squabbles, the fight was forgotten when the children encountered a uniting threat. They found one as soon as they reached the hideout. It was empty, their few provisions smashed to bits. There was no sign of Lillian or the children anywhere. Peter drew his fishhook and sniffed the air. The stench was overpowering. "Apes," he said somberly. "They must have been waiting here when the others returned." Peg's voice was tremulous. She knelt and picked up a scrap of cloth, torn from Lillian's apron. "If I hadn't sent them back here alone," Peter cut her off. "Then we'd be dead too. You said it yourself. The king was searching the tunnels. This wasn't our fault." "Not ours. Mine," she said softly. "They trusted me to lead them." She turned away from the others to hide her tears. Peter listened to her, and his frustration melted into genuine concern. "You will find them, Your Majesty. You have my word. But right now we have to leave before the creatures come back." "And go where?" She threw down the cloth and stood. "We're trapped. The king knows every tunnel in the kingdom." Peter couldn't help but share in her despair. Where could they go? He shook his head. "There's always the Mutt's Noggin." The others were silent. "It's an old thieves' proverb, he said. "The safest flea is on the Mutt's noggin." "It doesn't matter if our location is secret or even secure. It just has to be the one place our enemy isn't looking." Peter slid his fishhook back into his bag. "Your uncle thinks we're underground, and so we should go as far from underground as possible. And I think I know just the spot." While sneaking through a sleeping palace was simple enough, moving during daylight was another thing altogether. It seemed like everywhere Peter and the others turned, they found apes and citizens on the lookout for the dread Mr. Trousers, a.k.a. Peter Nimble, a.k.a. the Golden-Eyed Assassin. It was several hours before they reached the Mutt's Noggin, also known as the belfry of the clock tower. "Not like any clock I've ever seen," Sir Toad had observed upon reaching the top of the rickety stairs. "Why, there are no hands at all, just a blank face, ticking and ticking." They were on a small wooden platform surrounded by enormous clockworks. Peg touched the cog behind her, which was 3 times her height. "These same magic wheels live inside the walls," she said. "They make the locks open and close." She pulled her hand back as the cog lurched forward. Simon was just as mystified as the princess. And these chimes, he said, hopping toward an iron bell, they somehow call the sun, commanding its rise and fall. He pecked the rim, which responded with a soft ping. He fluttered to a window, checking to see whether it looked any darker outside. The king alone controls their magic. Peter attempted once again to explain there was nothing magic about locks or clocks, but Simon and Peg could not be made to understand. No, she insisted, it's dark magic my uncle brought back from far-off lands. Peter was starting to think that the far-off lands Incarnadine had visited were no more special than his port town. While no one back there had ever seen talking ravens or enchanted deserts, even the children understood basic scientific principles. He remembered what Professor Cake had said about distant seas being ruled by laws other than reason. He hadn't before considered how that might limit the people living there. Well, friend, he said to Sir Toad, it sounds like it will fall on you to decipher these. He took the scrolls from his bag and spread them out on the floor. When unrolled, the papers were large enough for Sir Toad to stand right on top of them. The knight paced from end to end, keeping his nose close to the markings. Good heavens! He gave a bitter snort. The king wasn't kidding. What is it? Peg said, kneeling to examine the strange papers. Sir Toad pointed a hoof at an image before him. Your Majesty, this is a picture, a map of the mines, and surrounding them, just beyond the rocks, there's a ring of dark blue. Is that the sky? She asked. No, it's water. Lots of it. And that infernal machine is headed straight for the stuff. All those years of digging, your uncle wasn't searching for jewels or ore. He was looking for the ocean. Then he's a fool, Simon said. Lord Hazelgood ensured that our shores would never again touch the seas. But the king's going beneath the shores, Peter explained. Even though he couldn't see the map, he had understood the basic principle. It makes perfect sense. Sir Toad and I overheard him say he was finally going to be free of the curse. This is how he's going to do it. But it's an enchantment, the princess insisted, as if invoking an immutable scientific law. You can't just go around it, can you? Sir Toad had spent the better part of his life studying enchantments and knew that they were notoriously riddled with loopholes. I fear he can, your majesty. If those sea dragons are any indication, he's already made some cracks in the foundation. It's only a matter of time before he breaks through in earnest. Then it's just as Lord Hazelgood feared so long ago. Simon said, Incarnadine will be free to sail out and besiege other kingdoms. Precisely. He's got all the makings of a war fleet down there, just waiting to be assembled. Sir Toad nosed through the pile of scrolls and pulled out another one with his teeth. Goodness, Peter, this was one of our maps, like the one Professor Cake showed us. I can see my home valley and your port town. Why, he's moving out in every direction. By the time he's through, half the world will be under his flag. The princess had never heard of those far-off places, but she imagined the rulers there would fare no better than her father. How could he take all those lands? Wouldn't he need a bigger army? Oh, he's getting one, Peter said darkly. We heard him bragging about how he planned to gather more apes and train them to fight. Don't forget the thieves, Sir Toad added. They've apparently agreed to help in exchange for their freedom. Apes are smuggling weapons into the just deserts as we speak. Oh, then my brothers are doomed, Simon said. There was a pain in his voice. Sir Toad, you have seen the places drawn on these parchments. You alone know whether his plan could succeed. The knight sighed. I have seen many impossible things in my travels, but before coming here, I had never heard of a man who can leash the dragons of the sea or teach wild beasts to speak like men. Incarnadine carries with him both the magic of your land and the advancement of ours, I fear for us all. Peter thought about his town, its sailors, markets, and merchants. What if King Incarnadine could really do it? Would Peter ever be able to go back? The idea of never again smelling the salty port air or treading the puddled alleys filled him with a sadness he could not explain. Like it or not, that place was a part of him. Thinking of his old life reminded Peter of how weak he really was. He couldn't even fight Mr. Seamus, let alone an armored tyrant. He was just as helpless as the slaves. With this came a new, even more disturbing thought. Sir Toad, he asked, what happens to the children when the drill breaks through? The knight hesitated. From what I could see, their chains were bolted to that rock in the cavern floor. If they're still down there when that water comes, they'll be drowned. Oh, the boy's heart sank. Incarnadine's plan was a death sentence. If Peter failed in his mission, the blood of all those children would be on his hands. How many days do we have? He said numbly. None, I'm afraid. If we're to believe that ape fellow, the king's drill should break through by morning, which means you have to free them all tonight. All those locks in one night? The boy clutched his trembling fingers. Peg gripped his hand in her own. It's a good thing we had Peter Nimble, the greatest thief who ever lived. Peter, however, could not share in her hope. Princess, there are hundreds of children down there. Your shackles are all rusted shut. Even ignoring the apes and sea serpents, a job that size would be... His words fell short. He knew it might take days, even weeks, to get through all those chains, and they had just a few hours. Not even I can pull that off. Peter felt her grip loosen slightly. Don't talk that way, she said. Of course you can. The girl's words filled Peter with shame. He could feel the desperation pouring out from her, from Simon, even from Sir Toad, and he hated himself for not being able to answer it. There's just not enough time. I'm sorry. Peg let go of his hand. You came all this way to help us, and now you're telling me it's too late? I told you it can't be done, he said, more insistent. His shame was fast turning into frustration. Just be thankful we're not locked down there with them. Already the old instinct of self-preservation was kicking in, and the master thief found himself considering his options. The most I could do is steal a boat, then at least we could escape ourselves. That's not enough. Peg stood up, put her hands on her hips, and spoke with all the authority she could muster. I command you to rescue the children. Peter jumped to his feet. I'm not one of your subjects. You can just boss around. All of a sudden, he felt incredibly tired. Tired of running, tired of getting kidnapped, tired of feeling hungry and cold. But most of all, he was tired of being responsible for people he barely knew. Besides, what's the point? Even if I could pick all the locks, what good would it do? We're still trapped here with apes, thieves, sea serpents. He grabbed a squirrel from the floor and waved it in her face. Don't you get it, Princess? We have no chance. Little girls, especially royal ones, do not enjoy being yelled at. As much as Peg projected the confidence of a strong leader, she could still be hurt. Her face was now red, and she was fighting back tears. Fine, she said. Then we'll all just die, you stupid, blind, selfish boy. She knocked the parchment from his hands. You're the selfish one, he spat back. This isn't about the kids at all. It's about you getting revenge for your dumb parents. Peter knew it was an awful thing to say, but he didn't care anymore. And by the way, I'm glad I'm blind. That way I don't have to look at your ugly face. She lunged at him before he could say another word. Peter had not been expecting the assault, and he failed to jump clear in time. Within seconds, both children were on the deck, cursing, kicking, and scratching with all their might. Peter was a brilliant escape artist and hard to pin down, but Peg was far stronger and knew a thing or two about headlocks. It was an even match. Sir Toad and Simon looked at each other and sighed. They watched the children roll across the floor, trading insults back and forth. You're the ugly one. You are. No, you are. Peter had one leg around Peg's neck and clutched her hair. With both hands, the princess was cramming several fingers into his nose and using her free hand to grab whatever she could to batter the boy with. A stray cog, a wooden plank, Sir Toad. Peter wiggled free, rolled over, and pinned his adversary to the ground. You are, he said with a triumphant laugh. Ha! I just beat you blindfolded. What do you say to that? In reply, Peg took hold of the box of fantastic eyes and brought it down on his head, knocking him out cold. As Peter came to, he expected the others to be crowded around him, asking if he was all right, feeling good and sorry for letting things get so out of hand. Instead, they were huddled in the corner, talking in hushed tones. Sweet justice, Simon murmured. Is it truly possible? Sir Toad gave an amused chuckle. Well, that certainly would explain the quarreling. Are mine that pretty? The princess asked. Peter, groggy from the blow, was having difficulty following their conversation. What happened? He propped himself up with his arms. What are you all talking about? Simon ignored the question. Why didn't you tell us about these earlier, Sir Toad? Well, we were instructed by the professor to keep them secret. Can't believe I didn't make the connection before. Seems rather obvious now. Peg ran to Peter and helped him to his feet. You should have told us, she exclaimed. You should have told me. The boy couldn't follow exactly what they were talking about, but he was starting to form an educated guess. I didn't tell you because it's none of your beeswax, he muttered, rubbing his bruised skull. He pulled away and went to inspect what had caused the stir. It was just as he had feared. The haberdasher's mysterious box had broken open, and lying on the deck were his 6 fantastic eyes. All all this time. They were right there in your bag. Peg tried to touch one, but Peter pushed her away. They're mine. He fired a scowl in Sir Toad's direction. And they're supposed to be a secret. There was no getting around it. Peter, when they saw what was inside, I had to come clean. Simon shook his head. The eyes. Mordecai. It all fits too well. What are you squawking about? Peter replaced the last of the eyes and closed the box. The raven hopped close and rested a talon on his head. I need you to listen to me carefully, my child, because what I'm about to say concerns you a great deal. The boy was curious despite himself. I'm listening, he said, holding the box to his chest. When Lord Incarnadine stole this kingdom so many years ago, he had only one fear, that someday a true heir would grow up to avenge his murdered parents. And so he ordered his apes to hunt down and kill the king's newborn son. Why not the daughter? While he was at it, Peter grumbled. He was still a bit sore at Peg for that knock on the head. I cannot say for certain. I suspect that it is his arrogance. Incarnadine assumed a girl would be less of a threat to his immense power, and so he instead had her locked away with the other children. Why waste a perfectly good slave? Peg said bitterly. Why indeed? I have no doubt Her Majesty's uncle has since revised his opinion. The old raven studied the girl with a touch of pride. He turned back to Peter. Regarding the second heir, the boy, Incarnadine was unsuccessful. This is because the child's mother, Queen Magnolia, spirited him away before he could be captured. She delivered him into the care of her personal guards, myself and a raven named Mordecai, and gave us our final mission. Save her unchristened son. Prince No Name, Peter said. We knew that Lord Incarnadine would stop at nothing to capture this child. The apes were searching the palace high and low for a male infant with emerald green eyes just like his father, just like the ones you hold now. Suddenly the box in Peter's arms felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. He bit his lip, almost afraid to ask, what happened to the baby? We had a few options. We knew that so long as the child wore those eyes, he would be in grave danger. The raven hesitated, almost unable to speak the words. And so we blinded him to protect his true identity from ever being discovered. The horrid memory sent a shiver through his plumage. After that, we were able to spirit him away without detection. Mordecai took the screaming baby in a basket and carried him beyond our ken. He was never heard from again. Peter was having trouble hearing, feeling, smelling, or tasting anything now. His whole being was overwhelmed with memories long forgotten. When I was a baby, he whispered, some sailors found me floating in the water. There was a raven perched on my head, and my eyes had been pecked out. Peter, Peg stepped closer and touched her hand to his face. You are Prince No Name. He's Peg's brother. Oh my gosh. And of course, that's the end of the chapter. Not just the end of the chapter, it's the end of the part 3. Did anybody guess that coming? Did anybody see that coming until they started talking at the very end? Peter is the Prince No Name. Peter and Peg are brother and sister. Holy smokes. That rocks my world. All right, well, you'll have to wait till next week to start the last and final part 3. Bye, guys.